this month we feature Chris Castro, who is the Senior Advisor to Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. He is the Director of Sustainability and Resilience.
The Resistance Director.
It's the Resistance.
Right.
He's the co-chair of Smart Cities for the City of Orlando. Chris develops policies and programs to advance the city's sustainability, clean energy, and climate action goals. Born in Miami, he grew up close to nature on a palm tree farm operated by his parents. When he wasn't playing in the soil, he was playing in the ocean. He enrolled at the University of Central Florida so he could continue surfing, although that isn't that close to the beach. You know that.
Closer than where it was.
But it was there that he found his calling. In 2006, UCF committed to becoming a carbon neutral and sustainable campus by mid-century. Go UCF. This inspired Castro to major in environmental studies, and 2 years later, he launched Ideas for Us, a nonprofit that engages high school and college students to find solutions to environmental challenges. So please welcome Chris Castro.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, and for the warm welcome to you all. It's fantastic. And earlier this morning, I got to go and hit the beach, and I got a little surf in from that little swell that's going off the East Coast, and that always that's my temple, right? It sets me straight, allows me to completely cleanse what's going on in my head. It is my, in my opinion, the direct connection I have with the natural world. I've never ever felt another feeling that I have when I'm actually riding a wave. It's unbelievable. So for those who haven't gone out to surf yet, I encourage you to do so. I'm really excited to be here to share some insights about the work that we're doing to advance a healthier, cleaner, and more sustainable future in Orlando. And the target, of course, today is going to be around our clean energy strategy. There's a lot more, and I'll talk about some of the other topics, areas of focus that I have. But, you know, we are going through an unbelievable renaissance in Central Florida. I think everybody's aware of that. And there's a lot of concern we're seeing concern at the federal level with stripping of environmental policies almost every other day. We're seeing concerns about about Florida's waters and what's happening at the state. But I'm hopeful that we can actually do something about this issue that we're facing, whether it's climate change or other environmental issues. I am very optimistic and hopeful because being in the weeds of it, I'm seeing an unbelievable amount of momentum and progress, not just in Orlando, but across this country. I'm part of several networks that I'll talk about where we are, sharing best practices among cities that are truly moving the needle as it relates to a sustainable future. So first I want to start out with kind of the big why around sustainability and the importance of Central Florida, really focusing on this as a priority. Many of you are aware about the incredible growth that we're realizing in Orlando, and just a couple of months ago, Orange County had their 2030 Economic Summit, and they updated the numbers about the number of people moving to Orange County, and it's roughly 1,500 people a week.
Wow.
Between 1,000 and 1,500 people every week are moving here to either live, work, or learn, right? And this is incredibly disruptive for a city like Orlando and surrounding smaller towns. You know, the onset of urbanization and climate change are beginning to completely flip the government model on its head. Technology's moving way too fast than we can keep up with. And government was never really intended to think about some of these complex issues of what happens when you have this influx of people, the way that we do, being one of the fastest growing cities in the entire country, right? And think about, what do we do with the waste that we're generating, or how do we address the congestion that we're seeing on the roads, or the energy and water consumption that we're dependent upon and is only growing per capita. These are all things that are really starting to turn kind of our thought on its head. And in addition to those living, working, and learning coming here, there's also this incredible boom of visitation and tourism, right? Who here knows the number of people who visited Orlando in 2018?
75 million?
75 million. 75 million people. So we have a metro of less than 3 million. We have a city limits in Orlando of about 300,000, 10% of the metro. And we have 75 million people coming to visit. every single year. It's about 200,000 people a day when you run the numbers, right? Or about out of every one resident, 255 tourists per year. Okay, 255 times the amount of people who actually live here are coming here to visit. And of course, when you're on vacation, most people aren't thinking about being good stewards or conserving resources, right? You're pumping down the AC system to get nice and cold, you're taking longer showers, you're producing about a ton of waste, and then you get to go back onto a plane, and we have to figure out how do we continue to sustain this type of development within our community. I actually don't think it's sustainable when you start to look at the overall compounding growth that we've seen over the last 5 and 10 years. A lot of what I'm talking about is a big reason why our mayor, Buddy Dyer, over 12 years ago had the thought process that if Orlando is truly positioned to sustain long-term economic growth, jobs, prosperity, quality of life for those who live, work, and learn here, then we need to prioritize sustainability to the highest extent. And it's been one of his top 3 pillars since he took office. And what's interesting about Mayor's approach is that it's not just about the environment. Too often people hear this term sustainability and they put it into this bucket. Oh, it's those people who are planting trees. It's those people who are doing cleanups. But truly, when you look at sustainability, it's a paradigm shift in how we govern, in how we run our businesses, in how we live our lives, to think about the triple bottom line: people, planet, and our collective prosperity. It doesn't make sense if something's really good for the environment but isn't good for public health or the economy. Guess what? That's not sustainable either in our way of life, in our society. If it's good for the economy but obviously not good for public health or the environment, current state, obviously that's not sustainable either. And so we got to look at this as a 3-legged stool, and each one of those legs being equally important in terms of how we go about making our decisions. His vision of being the most environmentally friendly, socially inclusive and equitable, and economically vibrant city in the Southeast United States, one of the most sustainable in the country. Sitting down with him and hearing that verbatim was the reason why I left a company that I started, took a back seat, and decided that I might be able to work with a leader like Mayor Dyer to really move the needle on what we need to do. So Greenworks Orlando has been the brand. Who here has heard of Greenworks, just with a raise of a hand, just so I know in the audience? Okay. So Greenworks Orlando was the brand that we launched to create this program. And it really looks at these 7 key focus areas that will make Orlando a more sustainable place: clean energy, green buildings, local food systems, zero waste, livability, clean water, and multimodal transportation. This has been known as a replicable model, and now many cities have taken the Greenworks model and have implemented it into their own communities, again, to figure out ways in which we can create a cleaner, healthier, and more prosperous future. And of course, with today's topics, I'm really going to touch on 3 of those 7 to talk about the overall clean energy strategy. Now, before we dive into that, I want to mention that Mayor Dyer and the City of Orlando has not been afraid to be, as he says, the tip of the spear on one of the most looming issues facing humanity, and that's climate change. He has been a mayor who isn't trying to hide behind this term because it's politically sensitive, but instead move away from the politics and say, listen, this is impacting our backyard. And it's critical for us to begin not just adapting to what's already baked in a changing future, but to figure out how we do our part to reduce the input that we have into the overall system. Orlando is one of just a few cities in the Southeast and many around the country who have signed the Under 2 MOU, which is the official Paris Climate Agreement for subnational governments. States and counties and cities all had the ability of joining in on what the federal governments in these nation states decided, and we brought forward, just months after the Paris Climate Agreement in December 2015, brought forward this to commit. But in addition have joined dozens of other different networks and collaborations and groups, things like the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy International, things like the climate mayors, local, which I'll get to, and Urban Sustainability Directors Network. These are all networks that we are working towards to achieve our goals. And so what are those goals? So you're aware, Orlando's goals for clean energy and green buildings really are broken down into these 4 facets. One is, how do we figure out how to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon emissions associated with climate, right? Climate change, reducing those emissions by 90% by the year 2040 compared to 2007 levels, okay? Now, what Paris was asking for was 80% by 2050 for the world. So 80% reduction by 2050. Mayor said, well, let's go further on our commitment goals in 10 years prior of the actual goal, just to make sure that although we're shooting for the stars, we'll probably hit the moon and somewhere in between, right? In addition, we realized that energy efficiency is going to be one of the most important strategies to achieving this goal. We can't do it just by changing energy supply and having our systems extremely inefficient. And I'll get into how we're moving that. Third is to ensure that every new building that's being built is achieving some level of high performance green building certification, whether it's LEED, Green Globe, Living Building Challenge. There are many that are well above and beyond the Florida Building Code. As I often say, the Florida Building Code is the worst building to build by law. It is the absolute minimum. We can't go less than that or else you'll not get a CO. So everybody is building to the worst. How do we change the paradigm to look further, right? And then lastly, it's this transition, and this was a big policy, but the transition is 100% renewable electricity by 2030 for all government operations and 2050 for the entire city. Every hotel, every theme park, every home, every business within our city. A lot of cities are making these commitments. Now there's over 140, I think, in the US who have committed to moving towards 100%. But the question becomes, how are we actually going to get there? It's basically a moonshot that we're after. And I'll tell you, after engaging with all of these cities, that nobody knows how we're going to get there. We have an interesting idea, but we don't necessarily know in the next 10 years the next technological innovation that will get us to that goal, right? And so we're kind of hedging our bet. When I spoke to some NASA scientists who were part of the Apollo mission, they told me, Chris, 80% of our engineering calculations were wrong. If we paid attention to our own math to get to the moon, we would have failed. The only way we got there was literally iterating as we were going every single second on the way up. We would have failed. And so it's important to know that we're setting this vision and we have some general ideas of how we're going to get there. But along the way, we're going to have to iterate, and we're developing tools, and I'll show you some that are going to allow us to pivot as we move forward with the onset of new technological innovations and other unexpected challenges that may arise, right? So I've been fortunate to be decent at writing grants and finding resources to help us to get to this point. And the 3 major grants in the Clean Energy Toolbox that we've gotten over the last 18 months are really helping us to put together a roadmap. The first one is an assessment with a company called Siemens. You might have heard of them. Very large engineering company. And they choose 5 cities in the entire country to do what's called the Citywide Performance Tool, CYPT. We happen to be one of the 5 selected last year. And what they do is they do an in-depth assessment on the actual technologies that can help us achieve these climate goals. What technologies currently commercially viable today are in the market that you can push if you had different policies to align with them to help you achieve that goal? The good news about that, and I'll get into it, is the goals are science-based and they're achievable. Secondly is road mapping, which is getting further into the details of, and we'll go through this, of how to take those technologies and begin to strategically implement them in a process that allows us to compound our momentum to hit this goal. And the last one is this Bloomberg grant. We're one of 25 cities in the country who were selected by Bloomberg Philanthropies in the American Cities Climate Challenge. And this is really looking at the policies and the programs that can help drive the technologies that we know are going to help us achieve the goal, right? So you have this whole cycle of improvement to get us to this place. Where are we today? We have been doing what we call greenhouse gas accounting since 2007. This essentially does an assessment of how much emissions does Orlando citywide contribute to the greater climate change issue, okay? And we contribute over 6 million metric tons per year. Over a series of years, we saw some dips and some valleys. We're on the way back up, but we are realizing one of the most important parts, and this came from the CYPT report, right? You'll see some of that, is that buildings and the energy use in buildings happens to be the greatest contribution to carbon emissions associated with Orlando's footprint by far. It's an 80-20 Pareto principle. 80% of Orlando's carbon footprint is actually buildings using dirty energy. And 20% is transportation. And most people have that flipped. They think it's all of the traffic, all of the transportation. It's actually not. And a big reason is the emissions factors. When you start to go into the weeds of greenhouse gas accounting, it's very difficult. You start to look at the emissions profile for a different source of energy. So coal, burning coal, has a certain emissions factor per kilowatt hour, and burning a gallon of gasoline has a certain emissions factor. And when you start to actually run the numbers, you see that coal's intensity of carbon is almost 3 and 4 times what it is gasoline and diesel. And so it's the worst fossil fuel that we can be using, right? And so that's why you're seeing, and we're still using some coal in Orlando, that's why you're seeing we're outweighted by buildings. Now in general, when you look at cities around the country, San Fran, New York, DC, Austin, Denver, all of these cities, same type of profile. Buildings are between 70 and 80% of our emissions in large urban settings, large downtowns, major businesses, right? Versus transportation. Nationally, it's a little bit different, but in cities where this is really happening, 70% of emissions globally are in cities. So if we're going to target this problem, we've got to empower local governments to begin changing the trajectory that we're moving, right? So further on that, this study with Siemens, which by the way can be downloaded on our website if you really want to dive into the details, Orlando's Green Energy Future, if you Google that, boom, it'll pop right up. It's a PDF. It's about 75 pages. This basically did a snapshot. And what you see here is 2007's baseline. You have a growth out to what we'll anticipate seeing a growth in the year 2040. And then you have wedges. You have these wedges here that show us how we're actually going to achieve the goal of 90% by 2040. And this study, engineering study, broke down exactly how. Look at this. This big wedge is electricity decarbonization and grid modernization. It's basically move from fossil fuels towards renewables. It's over 50% of the greenhouse gas emission profile. 53% could be eliminated, right? Then you start to break down everything from vehicle technologies, building technologies, and those are coupled together to the point to where technically by 2040 we can actually achieve this goal. What it said is if you push the technologies identified in each one of these wedges through policy, through requirements, however you figure out how to do it, you can actually achieve your goal. So it's science-based. What we've identified is this wasn't a lofty, maybe we'll hit it, it's actually backed by science. Now, as part of this Bloomberg challenge I talked about, we are exploring over 12 different policies and programs that are going to help us to reduce carbon emissions in Orlando. And it's everything from expanding renewables on city rooftops to figuring out new programs to help the community, our residents and businesses add renewables, to things like developing green building incentive programs for new construction to encourage them to go above that minimum floor, right? To things like developing a local energy resource center, a mobile museum on wheels that basically goes to schools and community centers and teaches our community about ways to accelerate clean energy in their own homes. And then a big focus on electric vehicles, buses, and fleets. And we'll dive into further detail here. But this is a little snapshot of about 8 of the 12 core strategies we're working on. So, first major topic I want to dive into is this notion of the built environment. You saw 80% of our emissions profile associated with buildings. question becomes, how do we make sure new buildings are built to higher standards, and how do we go backwards to get all of these existing buildings that were built to the lowest floor and raise their energy performance profile to make them more efficient so that their energy per square foot is lower and therefore the emissions profile is lower at the power plant. Interestingly enough, and I left one of these slides out on this presentation, there is an energy assessment that's done every year by the Department of Energy. And it has shown that about 2/3 of the energy we consume, this is in our vehicles, to our 18-wheelers, to electricity, to power plants, to our buildings, 2/3 is wasted. Only 1/3 goes to work, actually heating and cooling, driving industry and manufacturing, actually allowing us to present to you today. Only about 1/3 of the energy. So the energy at the site, we need about 3 to 4 times the energy at the source, at the power plant, to actually meet our needs, right? So when we start to reduce energy at our home, it's actually 3 to 4 times as impactful at the power plant, because we need that much less actual supply, coal or natural gas or renewables, to meet that growing demand, because you have a lot of inefficiencies. A thermal electric generation plant, which is coal and natural gas and nuclear, these are all plants that boil water, they make steam, they pressurize the steam, they turn a turbine with the pressurized steam, and around copper and wire, they make a kilowatt, an electron, and that electron then is sent on wires, right? That whole process of boiling, making steam, turning turbines, already 60% inefficient immediately. It's just so wasteful to do that. And then the line loss of transmission and distribution, and when you get to these substations you see in our communities, big industrial looking wires and stuff, right? That drops the voltage down so that we can actually plug something into the wall. All of those drops, you lose power. When it comes down to it, there's a massive, massive reduction in, or potential in reducing energy in our buildings. City of Orlando, here's a snapshot. We spend about $19 million per year powering the government. This is wastewater treatment plants, police stations, fire stations, community centers, admin buildings, all of that good stuff, $19 million a year. Well, 3 years ago, myself, some colleagues approached our CFO, and we said, we have an idea to save the city and taxpayers money, and at the same time help us achieve our climate goals. And she said, really, what is that? And we said, well, we want to take out $17.5 million of a bond. Her face changed when I told her that. She said, what? And I said, yes, I want you to give us $17.5 million, and in a 3-year period, we can save the city over $2 million per year in avoided cost. She says, oh, really? Give me the numbers. So we ended up doing a whole engineering study of 55 buildings, and we identified between 20 and 30% of the energy consumed in those buildings was going to waste. It was through inefficiencies. So we said, let's get this money and let's retrofit these buildings with high efficiency LEDs. Let's put automation and control systems in the lighting, to the VAV box, to the air handler, to the cooling systems. Let's start to monitor how we're using energy. And then we will take the savings that we're seeing and we'll pay back the bond. And this was approved. In the last 3 years, we have gone through a significant amount of our buildings. And here's a profile of just a fire station that had a reduction, 30% difference in energy use from the baseline. 30% in a fire station. We're seeing 25 to 27% in community centers. And these are simple things of taking fluorescent lights, changing them to LEDs, doing that times 5,000 fixtures. That starts to save a significant amount of money, right? And so we are tracking all of this data in a tool. This is kind of an interface you see of that tool that combines this data and helps us in real time manage our buildings based on data. So now we're not, getting a month, 30 days later and saying, why were we spending 10% more than we did previous years in this month? I don't know. Let's go. Now we're seeing it when it happens. We're seeing spikes. We're able to not just have situational awareness of our energy consumption, but also predictive maintenance opportunities to change out equipment that may need to just be replaced. And we're spending too much money to just continue to run it. So we're now saving $2.2 million per year compared to the baseline. 75% of that, about 1.75 million, is paying the bond, that 17 million, right, 0.5 million, paying that back over 15 years. As government, we were to stretch that bond out that far, and then we're taking a little bit of that savings, about 300,000, and we roll it into a revolving energy fund. So essentially, we're making money to reinvest back into more buildings to save us more energy, to make more money, to do this whole cycle, right? The question becomes, how do we do that for the buildings across our entire city, the ones that are privately owned? Right, because that's where the real savings is. We're talking $300 to $400 million of savings in a 10-year period could be realized, about 40 per year, could be realized by driving energy efficiency in our existing buildings. So, in thinking through this, one of the policies, we passed is called Building Benchmarking and Transparency. And what it does is similar to an MPG label on a car. You go to a car lot, every car has the same label, and you can make a comparison of one vehicle, even one automaker versus another, on how far you're going to go on a gallon of gas. And you can make an economic calculation to say, well, the hybrid or the electric might be $5,000 or $10,000 more, but annually I could be saving about $5,000, so in 2 or 3 years I make my money back, and then I'm straight savings, right? I can start to do those calculations. What else do we do in society that provides information transparency like that? What is another example? So we have MPGs on cars. What else? Food. Nutritional facts on food and energy gauges on appliances. Excellent. Both of those are perfect examples of how the market, the government, has stepped in to say, listen, your product actually has an impact on public health and the environment of which we depend upon. And as a result, transparency of the information will at least allow the consumer to make a more informed decision about what computer we want to buy, or what food we want to put in our body, or what car I want to get, right? When you go to rent an apartment or move your business to downtown, guess what they don't tell you? How much energy you're going to spend. What's your utility bills? No, they'll tell you your cost per rent, your cost per square foot for leasing, but they try to hide the information about energy because they realize that's a major contributor to operating your business or living, right? Total cost of living is not just rent, utilities, etc. So there's a policy that cities around the country, and now Orlando, the only one in Florida, has implemented, that require these large buildings to step on the scale, get a score of how efficient you are, and make that score publicly available so that when we go to rent an apartment, we can actually make informed decisions. This took me 2.5 years to pass. Hundreds of 352 documented in-person presentations to building owners, 10 citywide workshops with associations like ABOMA, NIFMA, NAOP, and USGBC, all these industry associations, right? 6 policy roundtables and 2 summits, 300 people each. It took me to pass this policy. Because what it did was require now that all of the information that we're gathering is now publicly available. And if I'm a building owner, and I'm a 30, which is a low score, right? 100's the best, 1's the worst. If I'm a 30, and my competitor down the road is a 50 or a 60, and they're spending 30 or 40 cents per square foot less to operate that building than I am, meaning they're pocketing more money, my question becomes, how can I improve my score? And where am I going to get the money to do so? Right? That becomes the next question. So one is, just by making this information transparent, building owners begin to pay attention because now they're monitoring and tracking, right? We can't manage what we don't measure, that's the saying, and now we're requiring the measurement, which starts to think differently about how to solve this problem. The next big barrier of entry is the money. Where am I going to get the money to make these clean energy improvements? Often clean energy improvements have great long-term savings and benefits, but the upfront cost is usually a little steep, right? And it's a different mindset. We're so used to short-term economic gain. It needs to be, it needs to be less than a 2-year return on investment, or I'm not going to do it. I know so many building owners who say that. If it's not less than 2-3 years, I'm not going to do it. You're going to own this thing for 10 plus years. Why would you not do this small, well, I don't know where I'm going to get the money from, and I don't necessarily, okay, I understand. The city has worked to enable different types of financing. And so we have three really important ones that I want to mention. One is called efficiency delivered. Who is an OUC customer? Is anybody in this room OUC customers? Okay, cool. Orlando owns our own utility, OUC. OUC has a program called Efficiency Delivered where you can get a free home energy audit. It gives you a list of opportunities to improve, and then they give you $2,000 up front to make those improvements and repay that $2,000 back on the utility bill over a 2-year period. So basically, the idea is for you to make improvements that obviously save you more than your annual payment every single year, and you could pay it off over time with no upfront cost, with no loan that you got to get. The utility provides that to you. That's called on-bill financing. It's the #1 method to drive energy efficiency in retrofits. So, oh, by the way, this is income-based. So if you're under a $60,000 per year household income, you get half subsidized by the city. And if you're under $40,000, you get 85% subsidized. You only pay $300 back over 2 years. We pay $1,700. Okay, so the idea is to also support low and moderate income communities who don't often have resources to pay more, and they are paying more. I'll show you. And so therefore we're trying to subsidize them. In addition, often they're renters. This is both for renters and for homeowners. The second major tool is called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, and this is the novel concept that has accelerated clean energy across the country. PACE allows you to essentially add an assessment to your property that allows you to pay incrementally over a long period of time on the property taxes. There are a lot of benefits to this. This is complex. I don't want to lose people. Long story short, there is money out there, $500 million, for homeowners and business owners to offset the upfront cost to make these retrofits, like lighting, like solar, like battery storage, like a number of other things, even roofs and windows count, and then pay back on the property taxes over an extended term. You can actually stretch it as far as 25 years for repayment. Small business took out $10,000. Here's an example. They took out 10 grand, they changed lighting and their hot water heater. That saves them $100 a month. $100 a month times 12 months, $1,200. They took $10,000, they stretched it over 10 years. They're paying $1,000 per year, but they're saving $1,200 a year. Cash flow positive from day one. That's the model. You're saving more than you have to pay back every single year one time on your property taxes, and therefore, and your property has increased in value, which those improvements don't go towards increasing your property taxes. This is important at the end of the day, and our strategy of driving more energy efficiency. So, I've been talking a lot about the demand side, how to reduce the amount of energy we actually need to meet our demands. The supply side is equally as important because, as we saw, the biggest wedge in getting to our climate goals is decarbonizing the energy sector. So the move towards clean energy is how we're going to get there. For those who are interested, this is how we currently meet our energy needs. This is the capacity. I want to mention that this is the capacity, but not the actual percentages of each one of those technologies that meets our needs. Some of them are more, some are less. So we have 775 megawatts of coal, but we're only really using about 350 of that to meet our needs, because it's actually cheaper to run the natural gas and the renewables to meet our needs. So although the capacity is this, the actual percentages differ. So this is a breakdown. We are diverse in how we meet our needs. We have coal, we have gas, we buy nuclear from South Florida. We have a growing portfolio of renewables. We have other clean energy technologies like landfill gas, where we're taking methane that's built up in our landfills, and we're piping that methane to actually offset the amount of fracked gas that essentially we need to meet our energy needs, right? So this is an interesting technology. But our city has made a pretty bold commitment, owning our own utility with all of that stuff. The commitment is we're moving, our vision is to move towards 100% renewables. Between now and mid-century, we need to for the planet, but in addition, it's an unbelievable economic development opportunity for Orlando. So this was the August 7th of 2017 when we passed through City Council, just 2 months after President Trump's, on the White House lawn, pulling us out of Paris. There's this huge wave of local governments. I don't know if you heard about it, but in a matter of 2 months, we went from Trump pulling us out to Paris to now over 140 cities who have committed to the 100% goal and doubled down on their climate commitments. And if those cities meet those goals, the entire country meets what we already committed to in Paris. So yes, that's important. Again, back to the local governments. Where this stuff actually happens is in our backyard. So they can talk all they want at the federal level about not wanting to be in this or not. I'll tell you that the local government leadership and mayors get it. They realize their people are being impacted by it, and they're doubling down. And if we do it ourselves, we can meet our goals and exceed them, right? So we have a couple of short-term goals between now and the end of 2020, and I'm going to run you through them. One is, I mentioned 100% by 2030 for municipal operations, but in the short term, our 2-year goal is 27%. Right now we're about 10.5%. So I need to add another 17% renewables by the end of 2020 in order to get there. And we're going to do that in 2 different ways. One way is we're going to install more solar on city rooftops, and the second way is we're going to procure from what's called the OUC Solar Farm, and I'll get into what that is here shortly. So here's a little snapshot of what we currently have. We're at current capacity is 10% of the city ops powered by solar. We have rooftop systems that you can see there, fleet and facilities in the permanent records building, and then we have subscribed already 5.2 megawatts of solar, and I'll get into what that powers shortly. New goal is 27%. An additional 15 megawatts added to that, which is a steep thing to do in 2 years. This is a nice snapshot of the fleet and facilities maintenance center, and you can see a huge solar array on top of that. It's 420 kilowatts. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side is schematics for a new solar carport that is currently in construction that will basically cover all of the cars underneath that part of the H building, right? So this is what you're seeing here. And that's going to be an additional 250 kilowatts and 17 dual hose EV charging stations, so 36 more EV charging stations under them. All of the EV will be coming from solar, powered by the sun. On top of that, this will be the first net zero energy campus, 10 acres of size in the entire city. So we're going to be net exporters of power when this thing goes online. We're going to be fully dependent to run our operations, and we're going to sell additional power, close to a megawatt of additional power every single month onto the grid. We also just, what happened there? We also just installed this new system. It's it's 114 kilowatts. It's on top of a records warehouse where we have our permitting division and the records warehouse. You can see it's fully covered on that north side of the building. This is the first net zero energy facility that the city owns. So now we're building buildings not only to be LEED Silver minimum. All city buildings have to be LEED Silver, including fire stations, community, all of them. But we're building them to be solar ready and EV ready. So if we can't add solar immediately to the rooftop, we're going to make sure that the conduits ran, that there's enough capacity in the electrical panel to interconnect solar, that we're going to have an inverter pad outside already there waiting to add the inverter. All of these little things that upon construction are hundreds of dollars, but when you come back to retrofit onto a building are $5,000 to $10,000 to come back to. So it becomes cheaper for us later on the line, right? So now all of our buildings are built to solar ready. This one we got to add solar immediately when it was built, but moving forward, everything is solar ready. Part of some of the assessment also is what is the actual potential of solar across the city and on city rooftops, the city-owned buildings, right? And so this is a little graphic that shows 5 different types of solar irradiance. Solar irradiance is the amount of solar that hits a rooftop. It's called solar irradiance. That's how it's calculated. And you can see that the city of Orlando has 748 structures. I want to say structures, not buildings, because we don't have that many buildings. But these are things like concession stands at the ballpark, right? That has a rooftop. That's a structure. Bathrooms at the park, plus our buildings and our fire stations, stuff like that. 748 suitable structures that can host about 35 megawatts of solar. This is a substantial, our overall load, just so you're aware, is about 65 megawatts. So more than half can be met with solar on our rooftops. And then we got to figure out the community solar subscription, right? We're doing also really in-depth analysis of the load. So this shows the actual load of each one of these buildings. How are they using power throughout the day? And this is hard to see because it's 14 buildings in one little assessment. What do you think these top users of energy are? Number one users in cities, usually across the country, of energy.
Hospitals.
Nope.
Space.
Nope. Wastewater treatment plants. The energy water nexus is real. The amount of energy it takes to pump water and the amount of water it takes to make electricity is unbelievable. They call that the energy water nexus. In fact, every kilowatt hour that we use takes between 20 and 30 gallons of water to make that electron. We use 1,000, on average in this country, 1,000 kilowatt hours a month of electricity. That's 20 to 30,000 gallons of water that isn't even the footprint of using for showering, irrigating, washing dishes, washing clothes. That's actual water footprint that we use and see. This is invisible water footprint that we're not even calculating in this whole system, right? So we got to think about that. Long story short, wastewater treatment plants are massive. And then we're looking at this thing called solar demand reduction. And the ability for us to actually shave what we call the demand charges on commercial buildings. Residential homes, we don't see this yet, because it's coming. But a residential home, we're charged per kilowatt hour. You look on your utility bill, it says this many kilowatt hours, this is the rate per kilowatt hour, you owe me this, right? In a commercial building, it's both consumption, or kilowatt hours, and demand, KW, demand. How much power at any given instantaneous time does my utility need to give to you as a restaurant in order to make sure you're operating without any challenges, right? And so there's a demand, and then there's a consumption of how much you're using. Sometimes the demand is only one spike in the middle of the month, and you're charged that spike. You're charged at the highest peak demand, even if it was for a second, you're charged at that spike for the entire month. So the goal becomes, how do I match solar in reducing the load profile of our energy demands? And in things like our gun range, you can see solar perfectly matches the use. But things like our community centers, which operate in the evenings sometimes when the sun isn't shining, you'll see some reduction in demand, but all of a sudden, bam, the sun's not shining here, spiked. So I wasn't able to lower the demand on that site. I'm just showing you a snapshot of the type of evaluation and assessment we're going through to make these decisions about renewables, right? This is really detailed stuff. So, 30 buildings have been assessed. We've done very deep level of assessment on each of these 30 buildings. They're all critical facilities. 911 call center, emergency ops center, shelters, like the community centers that become shelters during storms. We want to make sure that those are able to operate and are fully resilient before I start adding to ballparks, right? So that's the thought process. The 30 we selected are all critical facilities. And I'm happy to say that through all of this assessment, I've been approved $3.2 million, of which $2.3 million will go towards solar on critical facilities this next fiscal year. It drops in 2 weeks, October 1st. I've actually been giving $2.3 million for solar and $800,000 for EV charging, which I'll get into shortly. Pretty exciting stuff there. I'm going to move it for the sake of time. And the second one, the second major goal is all of that was for the city operations. What about our residents and our businesses, right? How do I start to expand solar projects in our community? And there's two ways to do that too. There's one, getting more rooftops solar installed on buildings, and two, getting more people to subscribe to that OUC solar farm. Before I dive into that, I want to show you, this is what's known as equity and energy burdened mapping. We've just performed this assessment to tell us, neighborhood by neighborhood in Orlando, where are our residents spending a disproportionate amount of their income going towards utilities. Those are areas that are energy burdened or utility burdened. The average is 2 to 3% of your household income goes towards utilities over the course of a year. There are some families in Orlando that are spending upwards of 20% of their annual income going towards utilities. They're renters. They're renting a home that may be owned by a landlord who might have 40 or 50 properties and don't want to invest in those properties because, of course, the renter pays the utility bill. So why would I invest in a new AC system to help you when I'm not going to see the savings as a landlord? We call that the split incentive, landlord-tenant complex. And so you have this situation where things like the efficiency delivered program from OUC and things like we're trying to figure out how do we start to address that issue. This gives you a snapshot, right? And again, this is electricity burden. And then this shows you total households in that burden. And then we also mapped it for water as well. And we have, of course, combined. But this is the level of thought process that governments need to think about, because sustainability for whom should be the question. Are we trying to sustain quality of life for current state today when a huge amount of our population isn't able to even live a good life because they're less fortunate or marginalized, right? We need to think about sustainability for everyone. It's about equity as well as economics as well as the environment, triple bottom line. So it's important for us to really be thoughtful about these programs. This is a short image of one of the largest solar farms that we have in Orlando. It's actually on top of an old coal ash landfill, believe it or not. Next to us over here is the coal plant and natural gas plants. You can see more solar here. You can see more solar here. So there's some pretty large scale arrays. And this is, when I say community solar, this is what I mean. There's large scale systems that you as an individual can subscribe to just a certain small amount of panels to offset your consumption at your home or your apartment or your business. Even if you're a small tenant in a larger building and you pay your own utility bills as that tenant, you can offset up to 100% of your power from that solar farm without installing anything, without spending anything up front. And when we look at the transition to 100% renewables, it will be a balance of large-scale utility farms, commercial and industrial, what we call C&I development, and then residential homes. It has to be. It's not one or the other. There's a lot of utilities want everybody to think it's just this. They don't want you to add solar on your rooftops. Advocates are saying, no, it's just rooftops, and not that. It's definitely not either of those. It's a combination of both. We have to. I mentioned Orlando, we're 10%. We offset, so you're aware, Orlando City Hall, Orlando Fire, all 17 fire departments and the police headquarters by solar, 100% powered by solar as of January of last year, January 1st, 2018. So little by little, we're going to need to inch our way towards getting more solar. The other way that we just launched a new program last month called the Orlando Solar Co-op. Who here has heard of the solar co-ops around? Okay, so solar co-ops are really interesting, and if you're interested in exploring solar, this might be your best bet, okay? A solar co-op is a group buying program where homeowners bundle their overall demand to go solar, and by doing that, lower the cost for every co-op member who wants to actually install solar on their roof. It's like going to Costco versus going to Publix. When you go to Costco, right, the unit cost for what you're buying is cheaper because I'm buying in bulk. Well, if I'm one person wanting to go solar, the market rate is about $3.20 per watt installed. If I go as a co-op member, it's about $2 to $2.15 per watt. Not lower quality, same panels, same everything. But instead, we had 300 people go solar, not one. What does that do for the solar company? Well, I no longer have to market and find customers. I have a pool of people who already want to go solar, so I'm going to pass on the savings of marketing and customer acquisition to the co-op so that you all can achieve better price points for solar, right? This is a novel idea. One of the founders, Mary DuBois, is amazing. The other founder, Michael Cohen, they launched this in 2016. In 3 years, statewide, we've done 50 co-ops and over 13 megawatts of rooftop solar. This is an unbelievable amount of solar for this small little nonprofit. I sit on the board, I'm one of the founding members. It's been an amazing journey. We've doubled rooftop solar in Orlando through this model in 2 years. We're about to double it again over the next 2 years. That's the goal, by launching another co-op. So I'll give you some links later at the very end, but this might be a cool one if you're really interested in going solar. I'm going to keep running through this real quick. I want to mention that we're all talking about affordable housing in our community, but also in every city around the country. This is becoming a massive problem. We're now beginning to see that a lot of our tax policies over the years have done nothing but stretch that income inequality to its highest extent, and we're feeling it, right? So this is a project, an example called New Horizons. It's in Washington Shores of Orlando, just south of Paramore. And we decided to renovate, as the city, go out to the market to find a partner to renovate 58 units of affordable housing. And I ended up writing a grant that got us some money to help us use this as a showcase for the developer to say, hey, we need to make sure that affordability and sustainability are woven together. Because again, it's not just about having low rents. When you're spending $200 and $300 in utilities, you're no longer affordable, right? We've got to think of this as an entire system, not piecemealed. And so we retrofitted all of these units. Every unit got nothing but Energy Star appliances, LED lighting throughout, heat pump water heaters, all this great stuff. We even added recycling and composting, a community garden, a bike share program, and everyone got solar tied to their apartment. 1 kilowatt of solar, which is about $20 to $25 per month worth of value to lower their utility bills. And now, an individual living in this housing complex is spending between $600 and $800 less if we wouldn't have come in to do those sustainability features. If we would have done the bare minimum back to the Florida Building Code, they would have been spending $600 to $800 more per year. Now with these features, they're spending much less and it's much more affordable. So this is all an interesting nexus. The last component on renewables is we are exploring what we call photovoltaics. I'm glad there's a couple people laughing there. The technical term for solar is photovoltaics, right? And so this is an example of photovoltaics. And again, we have literally 4,000 retention ponds. These are man-made pits that capture stormwater that are not spring-fed lakes with natural ecosystems. They're literally just cesspools for sediment and runoff, really. And instead, now we're figuring out ways to float solar power so that you can make electricity with unhampered, without taking out any trees, without worrying about any of your rooftops. We're looking at parking canopies, we're looking at floating solar, and one of the mayor's big pet projects last year has been adding that to the airport. So you will see floating solar at the airport pretty soon, definitely within this next year, probably sooner. So when you're flying in, you see a significant amount of PV on these water bodies. It's pretty neat. Does this stuff actually move the needle? Are we making an impact? There is a third-party firm called ACEEE, American Council on Energy Efficient Economies. When I came into the city in 2014, I did the first time ranked Orlando as part of this national study, top 51 cities in the country. Orlando comes in at 30th. Best in the state of Florida, second best in the Southeast. We're still behind Atlanta significantly, right? 15 spots. Coming into the city, my question was, what the heck is Boston doing as number one, right? Like, what is Boston doing? What is New York? I ended up doing peer-to-peer meetings with the top 10 cities in the country. And a lot of what you have seen here were best practices that some cities were doing versus another, and we brought together in this comprehensive approach to how to build clean energy in Orlando. So we're 30th. That was 2015 score. 2017 score comes in, we jump 10 spots. We went from 30th to 20th. Most energy improved city in the country from 2015 to 2017, okay, through some of these things. That's when the benchmarking policy lands, PACE lands, all of these other cool things, and we're traction's building. 2019 comes out, 15th in the country, best in the Southeast now. We beat Atlanta. And we are by far one of the leading models in the entire country for how to accelerate the growth of clean energy strategies within your city based on policies and programs. So this stuff is actually working. We are actually moving the needle and moving it significantly, and that's really exciting. Last section, which is still that 20%, is transportation. And this one's much quicker, but I will say a big focus of mine is how do we push people out of your car and into alternative forms of transportation to get around the community, right? That's the only way we're gonna make sustainable cities. We gotta make them walkable, bikeable, we gotta encourage that type of use or else we'll never get there. So we've been doing a lot with urban trails and sidewalk expansions. Of course, we have Sunrail, we have now Lime and Hopper in downtown, the bike share program. Soon we will be getting scooters within the next few months. There's a lot of people interested in scooters. We're a little concerned, but we're gonna make it happen either way. We could always pull out, is what I told the mayor. I'm like, we could always just, take these things off, let's try it. Where have we ever been that risk averse, is what I told them, like, usually not. And then the Virgin train, right? So we have this high-speed rail coming from Miami, which will be here in the next 2 years. Really exciting stuff happening. But what about electric vehicles? Part of the study with the U.S. Department of Energy, NREL Lab, was to look at forecasting the growth of electric vehicles. And what it is telling us is that by 2050, 67% of passenger vehicles on the road will be all electric or some form of electric vehicle. It could be hydrogen electric at that point, which I'm thinking it might be. It could be lithium-ion battery electric, some form of electric, all EV, no emission, 67% vehicles. You're talking about an explosion of cars on this road as we start to transition out of our old clunker fossil fuel cars and SUVs into these more environmentally friendly alternatives. So we've tried to make sure that we are EV ready, and whatever we're doing, the takeaway here is Orlando is positioning ourselves as a future ready city. We will never know what 2050 is going to hold and what energy mix we'll have. We'll never know. We'll have to iterate along the way, but we're being ready. So we got out ahead. In our fleet, I came in, there was one EV in the city of Orlando. There's now over 120 electric vehicles. Code enforcement, parks, other departments are now transitioning their Corollas into EVs because they're realizing, at the end of the day, the EV can still allow me to produce the same service, safe, great quality, while minimizing cost and emissions. No brainer. We also have started to convert the police fleet, the motorcycle fleet of the police department, to all electric. That was an interesting exercise. They were very reluctant at first, but now they love this bike, which is great. And little by little, we have expanded over 400 electric vehicle charging stations in the greater Orlando area, of which half are in city limits. Massachusetts, the entire state, has 600. We have 400 in the greater Orlando MSA. Okay, that's the density of EVs. Of course, it's a chicken or the egg situation, right? You have to have enough infrastructure to ensure that the anxiety of the EV owner is minimized so that they feel confident that I can buy an EV and charge wherever I go, right? So we're doing a lot to ensure that we're getting ready. We even have, the only one in the country, an EV rental car program at the airport. It's called Drive Electric Orlando. In the last 3 years, we have had a partnership with Chevy and Tesla. Now there's over 100 electric vehicles at the airport, and when people come in for conventions or you come in with your family, guess what? You can ride an EV, and guess what it does? It doubles as a VIP pass. We approach Disney and Universal, they waive parking, they give you free charging, right, which is like gold on the floor is what I tell them. I just found gold. Not only that, the parking, if you've been at Magic Kingdom or any of those, the parking is literally closer than the handicap parking to the park. I was shocked. I was like, wow, that was a risky move, but it's literally the closest parking you can ever get to. You roll right up, you plug in free of charge because it comes with the car. And some hotels, because we partner with CFHLA, the Hotel and Lodging Association, some hotels offer free valet and of course free charging at their hotels as well. So it becomes this perk. We call it pluginperks.com. In fact, it becomes this perk to rent the EV, which is about the same amount you're going to rent a Corolla, but you get all these other benefits. We could be the EV test ride city of America. Think about that. People, the 75 million people coming here, they can get into the car and completely transform their experience and their next vehicle selection after that. 80% of the people who have rented these cars have said that their next vehicle purchase will be an electric vehicle. 80% based on their experience. Pretty awesome. And then lastly, on the buses, I'm really excited because I've been pushing EV buses the last 3 years in Orlando. I finally have gotten this. I brought down all of these bus manufacturers and did ride and drives with the mayor and all of our peeps. And we just, less than a month ago, received word from USDOT. We got $2 million that will help us buy 8 electric buses and begin to convert the downtown limo, that bus rapid transit, the free service that we have, into a full electric zero emission bus system, and the first one in the state. And the goal is, of course, to trickle out to the entire service territory over time. And we're doing really interesting business models with the utility and the transit authority to accelerate more of that. And I think it'll just be boring, but there's some cool stuff happening there. So electric buses are coming very soon. Back to the moonshot planning. We're looking at this in terms of where we want to go. We never go to 100%. How do we get there? We have this tool, Oasis, which I'll get to next. What will get us there? Policy and program toolkit and these new utility business models. How do we get started? The municipal analysis that we talked about and the re-opt analysis, which is citywide, helping us to target the buildings we're going to get there. This is Oasis. I should have flipped those slides. This is that iterative tool. So this is a dynamic tool that allows me to put, okay, my potential that I want to achieve is 100% renewables in the residential and in the commercial. I can change that to 78 and 52, and it will completely change the dynamics of where we should be pushing to achieve our 100% goal. Green is energy efficiency. Blue is actual solar and production. So again, half of the resource to hit 100% is going to be lowering energy per square foot, lowering the consumption of power because of how wasteful we are actually at the end of the day. So this is an important tool because it's going to allow us to hit the moon or the 100%. Shameless plug, who here has seen Paris to Pittsburgh so far? If you haven't, National Geographic also thought that our story was very interesting and last year approached us and they produced a documentary that was published in December, and it literally showcases Orlando as one of just 5 other communities around the country accelerating the growth of climate action and renewables. It's very exciting. It shows a lot of cool stuff that we're doing, so I encourage you to watch it with your families. It's on, you can find it online, it's on YouTube and stuff like that. And with that, I'd love to engage you with Q&A, but hopefully this gives you a different perspective of the opportunities and what we are doing to genuinely move us in the right direction. I think we have a lot of momentum, and despite some of the federal and state challenges we're seeing on social media, Orlando gets it, and this community, you all, and our residents are truly in a position to lead a cleaner, healthier, and more sustainable future. So I appreciate you coming out on this Sunday, and looking forward to it.
Thank you. We have a question back
Hey, Chris. Thanks for the talk. I'm a resident of Winter Garden, which is a very fast-growing community in West Orange County. Have you had any talks with Winter Garden? Would you be willing to have any talks with Winter Garden? I don't know what they're doing with respect to all of this. So.
Number one question I get when I go and speak in this community is that one exactly. I live in Maitland, I live in Winter Garden, unincorporated, can I do these programs? Yes, I haven't been in touch with Winter Garden. They actually just hired a new coordinator, sustainability coordinator in Winter Garden. First time in their history.
I've heard from her actually.
Yep, so her and I have been in touch. She's part of a group. I want to let you know that we just, as of May of this year, established a new collaborative in Central Florida. And it's called the East Central Florida Regional Resilience Collaborative. This collaborative is being administered by the Regional Planning Council, RPC, right, which looks over 8 counties and 78 cities in East Central Florida. It's Brevard, Volusia, Orange, Osceola, Seminole, Sumter, Lake, and I think one more, and then a bunch of the cities throughout. So this RPC, the Regional Planning Council, I approached them 2 years ago and said, listen, the number one question I get is how do I start replicating this stuff in other cities and counties? How do we start to bring together, leverage what you already have which is a board of elected officials of all these cities and counties, and start to move forward a more meaningful collaborative. And so May 15th, they voted unanimously in favor to create this new collaborative. And we are now working on a strategic plan. I had my last meeting on Friday with them, and it's across the entire region. We're going to do a regional greenhouse gas inventory and accounting. We're going to do a regional risk and vulnerability assessment to climate change to East Central Florida. We're going to start to write grants together and share policy language, and the idea is for us to start to get the Winter Gardens and Maitlands and Winter Parks to start replicating some of the strategies that
All the stuff that you stole from Boston, you can share with
basically,
us.
yeah, Boston and Denver and San Fran, all of them. This stuff,
Yeah.
for sure.
Excellent.
There's some unbelievable stuff happening.
We've always thought about getting solar, but we thought maybe that was too expensive for us. So we found out Solar Co-op is holding neighborhood meetings.
Yes.
And we're going to attend one and
Good.
see what's gonna happen.
Excellent.
I'm not committed, but I'm still gonna go to this
That's
meeting.
okay.
So
And that's an
if
important-
you could put the link somewhere about.
Yes.
I think I just Googled Solar Co-op or
Yep.
something.
Orlando Solar Co-op,
Yeah,
it'll pop
yeah,
back
yeah.
up.
And then it had all
Solar,
these dates and.
exactly.
meeting places.
SolarUnitedNeighbors.org, SolarUnitedNeighbors.org/Orlando takes you to that webpage. There's about 6 more workshops in the community that we're hosting, all throughout Orange County. This is open to anyone in Orange County, not just the city of Orlando. So if you're in Maitland or Garden, all of them, Orange County counts. And it's important, you brought up an interesting point about solar being expensive. That's usually the misnomer, is that solar is expensive. The challenge is that when you buy solar, you're buying 25 years of electricity up front. And so you're literally discounting over time, right? When you buy solar panels, those solar panels are warranted for 25 years. They will produce at the capacity that's been installed up to a certain buffer for 25 years. If it doesn't, you get brand new panels, okay? Now, our way of life is a pay-as-you-go, month by month, based on my consumption, way of living, right? If the utility came to you today and said, I have a great deal, I'm gonna lock in your rate of electricity for 25 years, but you have to pay all 25 years now. Would you do it? All 25 years. So the utility comes to you to say, I saw your average bill over 5 years is this. I'm gonna have you pay that times 12 times 25, but you gotta buy it now, and I'm gonna just lock in your rate for it. 98% of people can't do it because they don't have the financial resources or the credit score to go get a loan to make it happen, right? When you buy solar, you're basically doing that. You're buying upfront power for 25 years minimum, because it produces much longer than that, and then you're banking over time. But you levelize your cost of power. Happens to be much lower than the grid price. Much lower. It's like 6 cents a kWh to install right now. The grid is 11 cents. So if you just look at the economics, that's why things like PACE are so important, because I'll give you the money up front to put solar on your roof. As long as you pay it back on the property taxes over an extended term, right? Stretch it 10, stretch it 20 years, and pay it incrementally. And that's why we're trying to offset that upfront cost. Yeah, so it's important to realize that the economics is really based on your perspective, and that yes, it's expensive to buy 25 years of power up front. In 40 other states in the country, they allow you to enter into an agreement with a solar company called a power purchase agreement, and you pay the way that we pay the utility. You pay monthly with the power purchase agreement. In Florida, it's illegal. It's literally outlawed because the large utilities want you to be their customer. And so they have a monopoly on the marketplace in Florida. If you live here, you buy from OUC. If you live on the coast, you buy from FPL. If you live up in Seminole, you buy from Duke Energy. You don't have a choice. You can't choose your power company. And so what it does is it makes the solar companies who have these third-party opportunities illegal. It makes them illegal because they're not regulated utilities. That's how 75% of solar has been installed since the inception of installing solar, has been the third-party sale, third-party power purchase agreement, because most people don't have the resources to buy 25 years of power up front. So they just want to incrementally pay over time. It's illegal in Florida to do that. So talk to your utility company, maybe they'll change their mind. But they've been fighting that a long time.
So regarding that power purchase agreement,
Yes.
kind of timely, this Los Angeles just signed one of those deals
Yep.
where they're getting kilowatt hours for well under 2 cents
Yep.
per kilowatt hour
1.39
power and
size.
storage.
Yep.
So you can use the solar at night.
Correct.
I just did the calculation on my electric bill,
Uh-huh.
and it looks like I'm paying about 12 cents per kilowatt hour if you
Yep.
take the total price.
About that, 11,
So
12.
way under 6 times, right?
True.
Could the city of Orlando outsource and get a company to finance all that and buy power at 1/6 the cost?
That's what we're doing now. So basically, the community solar program that I talked about, the first attempt at that was back in 2015, and we installed a 400 kilowatt solar carport. So basically a shade structure over a parking lot. It was only 400 kilowatts. The price point 5 years ago on that array was 16 cents a kilowatt hour, $160 a megawatt hour. So 16 cents, right?
Going through the floor.
Yep. The large array that you saw there, 13 megawatts, came in at 7 cents a kilowatt hour, $70 a megawatt hour. Natural gas and coal, our generation now is right around 4 to 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour to produce power from the power plants, okay? We just signed a deal, and I didn't even mention it, for 108 megawatts of solar that's being developed as we speak. It'll come online by the end of 2020. It came in at 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour. $35 a megawatt hour. So now we're cheaper than fossil fuels today with no subsidies, with no incentives, with no SREC market in Florida. There's a lot of things going against us. But we're seeing that at scale, now the 108 megawatts is scale. You're talking about significant amounts of power. And of course, just like the solar co-ops where you're buying in bulk, guess what happens at that scale? Drops it to less than $40, 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's all about scale. The LA one is gigawatts. I think it's 1.5 gigawatts
Yeah, it's giant, with storage though.
with storage. Yep.
Which is the battery backups for those people that don't know.
Yep, and at scale, you'll get it to the, I think there was 1.39 for the
1.39.
solar, and then another 1.4 something for the storage.
Under 2 cents for both.
I don't know, I'll
You
have
look
to,
at
okay.
I mean, it could be wrong, but
I think it's
Could be
one,
right.
I think it's
Could be
split. I think it's split, I've been looking into it. But either way, you're still under 4 cents a kilowatt hour with storage plus solar. FPL just took down 2 natural gas plants early. They had another 15 years left in their lifetime. They early retired and are building solar plus storage. Why? Not to be green. Because it's the cheapest way to make money, period, in the market. They're going all in, not to be environmentally friendly. It happens to align with that, but they're doing it to make more money, and they're realizing it's the cheapest way. So it's a good thing. The market's moving in a positive direction. We are doing that. Those arrays are owned by third parties. They're power purchase agreements to our utility. I think one of the reasons we do that is because the utility is municipally owned, so it's public. We don't get the 30% investment tax credit if we buy the solar, right? If a private company buys the solar, they get a 30% back in year 1 from the ITC. If OUC builds it or the city, guess what? We leave 30% on the table. So the model is to get a third-party owner-operator to build it, design it, own it, operate it, sell us the power, and pass on the 30% as part of the PPA rate. And so that's how these systems work for municipal utilities, right? That may change as the ITC, the investment tax credit, starts to drop. Supposedly next year to go to 26%, then 24%, then 22%, then 10%. There's a bill in the legislature to try to extend the 30% another 5 years. That's hopeful. I think it's bipartisan. It's getting support. So we may see another extension of that. We already did that back in 2017. We're going to do that again because we realize it's a big part of making the market accelerate, right?
Okay.
I hope I'm not the only one getting lost in the numbers a little bit there. Great job. I just wanted to talk about, no, I was just, there's a lot to think about here.
I know.
One thing I wanted to talk about, anytime I hear about renewable energy, solar energy, is sun shining all day, and I might not be home using any of it. And really, it's all
Good
about the
question.
grid work, being able to accept that power. So whenever I hear it on NPR or something else, they'll talk about all these homes in an area that gets all this solar power installation, and there's, the grid work is overloaded. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, most definitely. Great question, by the way. And there's another misconception is if you have solar and the grid is down because of a hurricane and you're net metered, guess what? Your solar doesn't work either. We completely turn it off because safety of line workers, right? If you're producing power and pumping on the grid and you have line workers picking up this line that's on the floor, they're dead, right? So if you're if you have solar to battery, battery to grid, you cut off the grid and you use battery and solar and you could be on your own. That's the beauty. But if you don't have a battery in the middle point there, you actually go down, your solar array goes down when the grid goes down. So that's really important to know. Now, what you're talking about is a term called net metering. Net metering. Net metering is a required law at the state of Florida for utilities to buy back excess power that's produced on your rooftop that isn't being consumed by your building and credit you equal to the power value that you buy from the grid. They call it one-to-one retail rate net metering. Retail rate. So, you know, I'm at home or I'm at work, I'm pumping electricity onto the grid. My meter essentially is giving me credits, and when I come home, I'm using those credits as offset of my consumption. At the end of the year, if I made more than I used, then I get a check from the utility. The check from the utility is not retail rate, it's wholesale, what they call avoided cost. So when you go beyond net, meaning beyond the consumption that you had, that you matched up, let's say you produced 120 but you consumed 100, to keep it simple, over the year, that 20 is cut a check to you at an avoided cost, which is about 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour, versus the retail rate, which is 11, 12 cents, right? So they have to give you one-to-one until you overproduce at the end of the year. Okay, and it rolls over, your credits roll over month, so if you overproduce credits 1 month, like in the summer you may overproduce, and in the winter when the sun is a little bit lower in terms of its azimuthal, you're going to get a little bit less production, but you can make up that difference with the banked credits that you have, and at the end of the year, if you have more credits than you consumed, they're going to cut you the check for the avoided cost, again 4.5 cents a kWh. What utilities are trying to do right now is eliminate the retail rate one-to-one and give you only value for avoided cost from the get-go. And that would completely change the dynamics and the economics around solar significantly. It would extend the return on investment twofold, basically. An 8-year ROI, which is what we're seeing now in solar, 8 to 10 in Florida, would be about 18 to 20 years of a return if the value of my electron that the utility is getting is only half the cost of the value that I'm pulling from it, right? So then I'm in a deficit always, unless I have a battery system of which I'm able to completely offset myself, right? I'm still connected to the grid because that's by law you have to be, you can't be off the grid in Florida, but you can have your own storage and production and you can basically be off the grid on your own. You'll pay the $8 service charge every month that you have to the utility, but that's it. So that's where it's called net metering, and again, we're going to be hit. The utilities in the state are already chatting about lowering net metering, and so there's a huge upwelling of local organizations trying to get ready for this fight because we're going to fight about it in the next couple of, for sure, we're going to fight about it. And it's important that municipal utilities can actually choose what they want to do currently without needing to go to the legislature. So investor-owned utilities like FPL, Duke, Gulf Power, TECO, these are privately owned, stakeholder-owned utilities, right? They have to do one-to-one. But local utilities like OUC, technically they don't. They're not abiding, they don't have to abide by that law. So OUC, and Jacksonville already did this, JEA already reduced their net metering down to avoided cost already. And the solar market is hit super hard up there. I have friends who own solar companies and they're like, I just laid off 13 people. Literally, that's how much it's being hit. So, and I advised the mayor to OUC in engagements, and I sit down with the CEO every single month to talk through where we're at with OUC. And I'll tell you that they're already like, all right, Chris, we're going to set up a meeting with you here pretty soon. We want to talk about new rates, and what that usually means is we're going to talk about net metering value. Their concern is that those without solar are being disproportionately impacted by those with solar, because those with solar technically aren't paying for the maintenance of the grid, right, is their argument. There's several studies out there by 27 other public service commissions at the utility level that actually show those without solar get a net benefit to those with solar up to a certain level of what we call penetration in the market, up to a certain percentage of solar in your overall mix. 20% happens to be that tipping point. Right now in Orlando, we're sub 3%. We're about to move to about 7-8% with this 100 megawatts. And so OUC and these utilities are trying to get ahead of the curve when you have 20%, and now you have a huge amount of your customers who have solar, and they're going to fight that harder than the current fight would be if we start to address it now, right? And so they're trying to get ahead, but I'm trying to pull them back and say, listen, we have a 100% goal, we have all these commitments, we have these programs. Why would our own utility try to stall rooftop solar? Again, they want to go all in on utility scale solar. Why? Because they control utility scale solar. They don't control distributed generation on your rooftop. Unless they pivot and they have a business model where they own the solar on your rooftop and every single month are charging you instead of you buying it. Now the utility becomes an energy service provider, which is the utility business model of the future. We move from selling kilowatt hours one way to now selling services to our customers, which include battery storage as a service. What if for $10 a month, you can have a battery system in your garage and you pay $10 a month like a fixed rate, no upfront cost to add the battery, and then the utility can pull from the battery throughout the month if they need to, and they'll give you credits to pull from the battery, just like net metering, right? But if the power goes out, guess what? You have your generator now backed up for $10 a month. If they own 10,000 of those batteries and they start to pull 10,000 in peak demand, guess what? They can save significant amounts of money. Because when you go above the peak demand, they're buying more expensive power to meet Orlando's growth. And that's usually 2 or 3 times as much as they're selling it to you for. So instead, why don't I do what they call demand side management, where I'll pull from these smart appliances, all the IoT, right, your hot water heaters now, washer and dryers, they're all smart appliances that can communicate to the utility, and the utility can say, I'm gonna bump your AC up 3 degrees. I do that times 10,000, guess what? I shave 10 megawatts off of the grid. Because now everybody's home, while you're at work, is just 3 degrees warmer. It's now 78 versus 75. You don't even notice it, but the grid sure does, right? Because again, 3 to 4 times as much power is needed at the source, at the power plant, to give you that extra degree. You're talking about scale here. This is big. So we're moving towards this really interesting future where the utility is going to play more of a service provider, a trusted partner, and they're going to mainly manage the grid versus be an vertically integrated power producer, grid manager. They're going to start to charge you to put energy onto the grid to make it go around, right? That's where we want them to go. We want them to move that way. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we're gonna have one more question. Lenise, you have the last question.
So retrofitting more modern buildings and building new ones to make them more energy efficient, I see that happening, but what about within, especially within Orlando city limits, the historical buildings that have been around, you know, for way longer than I've been born and even earlier? How would that be a concern when it's a historic building?
Yeah, it's a concern. My good historic preservation director and I have great lunches together, let's just put it that way, about this conversation. One very important notion, Florida is a solar by right state. We've passed legislation that requires historic preservation districts and homeowners associations to allow you to add solar to your rooftop. There is no one in the state who can say, no, you can't add solar to your roof. Now what they can do is kind of help to determine where those solar panels go up to a certain point. They can't make you put it on the north side of your home because we're in the northern hemisphere and solar only makes sense on the south side primarily, right? So if you put it on the north side, you reduce a significant amount of power generation, and I think it's like 40 degrees east or 40 degrees west of due south, they can, you know, encourage you to put, but they can't flat out say, no, sorry. So on historic districts, we've been working on, there's actually a good literature out there and a guide for cities on how to add solar to historic districts and historic buildings. They obviously don't want it to be, for whatever reason, they don't want it to be in the front facade of the home. And so if your home is south-facing, rooftop is in the front facade of the building, guess what? Your home can't necessarily be solar. And there was a big debate a few months ago where a homeowner whose home actually isn't historic, but the community that they're in is historic, and therefore they have to abide by those policies, wanted to put solar, and the best place was on the roof there on the south side, and you know, basically they weren't able to. The Historic Preservation Board voted it down and said, well, you could put solar over here on the west side, you could put it over on kind of this northwest side, but you can't put it on the south side because it's visible from the street, and unfortunately that's not allowed. My kickback to them was, well, what about the power lines, right? What about the power lines? Hold on. We're trying to underground utilities now, and we're doing these in historic districts of our community, believe it or not. So we're undergrounding the lines. Doesn't that take away from the historic aesthetic of having overlaid power lines?
Yeah.
Does that not? Yes, it does, 100% it does. And even our planning director's like, actually, that's a really interesting point. Because it's all about the aesthetic. Has nothing to do with the structure. Again, this one particular home wasn't even a historic home. It was built way after the historic district, but it was in the district. And so I was arguing, why wouldn't they be able to put solar? Oh, well, they're in the district, and so therefore it's the aesthetic of the district. And I said, the aesthetic, huh? Well, you undergrounded in the same district 2 years ago. What happened to the aesthetic there? Huh. No comment. Okay, no comment. Nobody thought about it that way, right? So I think we've got to find a balance. I think it's important to protect historic properties, no doubt. At the same time, I think it's critical that we start to, you know, do whatever we can to add as much clean energy sources to wherever we can add it, because of the sake of our humanity, for one, of the planet, for two, of the local economy, for three, the health and well-being, quality of life, you name it. I think that's above that. So, thank you for listening to me rant.
Thank you.